so far to Jerusalem with Jesus. You're his disciples. So disciples, your feet are very dirty from all the walking on the dusty roads. So Jesus did something, the first thing he did, boys and girls, that surprised his friends that had been with him forever, is he said, I'm going to wash your feet. And they said, what? You're like the most important person here. You're the rabbi. So the job of washing somebody else's feet in the time of Jesus was a job that was done by a servant or a slave, or maybe the lowest person that happened to be at your party. But it wasn't the job of an important rabbi. A rabbi is like the priest for the Jewish people. He teaches the people about God. He teaches them and instructs them, and they do things for him. But Jesus said, that's not what we're going to do today. But boys and girls, I need you very quietly to take off one shoe and sock. And when I get to you, I'm going to wash your feet like Jesus washed the feet of his disciples. Just one shoe and one sock. And I'm going to ask you after I wash your foot to hand me your towel. We're going to be quiet. We're going to be very quiet while I do this because I want you to hear the things that Jesus and his friends were thinking and saying. So Jesus said, I'm going to wash your feet. Boys and girls, can you sit there without talking to one another? And he tucked a towel, it says in the Bible, onto his waist. And he grabbed the water that the slave would use. And can you imagine how surprised they are? And Jesus took the feet of his disciples and he washed them. And he did this because he wanted them to learn a lesson and because he loved them. Jesus loves you so much. You can finish wiping your foot. When I'm done, you can finish wiping your foot and put your shoe on. So Jesus was washing people's feet, and they were probably pretty quiet because they were so shocked. No, Jesus was doing it because he loved them. He loves Jesus loves you so much. His friends, I'm sure, were pretty shocked at what he was doing. He did it because he loved them. And Robert, Jesus loves you so much. What's your name, sir? So Henry, Jesus was washing the feet. But can I tell you, one of the disciples, Peter was his name, he said something to Jesus because he just couldn't be quiet anymore. Jesus was doing this, Henry, because he loved him. And Henry, Jesus loves you so much. So Bennett, you know what Peter said to him? Peter said, Lord, you're not going to wash my feet. But Jesus wanted to wash Peter's feet because he loved him. And Jesus loves him so much. So Grace, Peter said, I don't want my feet washed. Not by you. You'll never wash my feet. But Jesus said to Peter, well, if I don't wash your feet, you can't be my father. Jesus loves you so much. So Peter said, Jack, he said, well then Lord, not only my foot, but my head too. Jesus told him, Peter, you're already clean. You just need your foot washed to follow me. Alistair, Jesus wants you. So the apostles sat quietly having their feet washed, and Jesus did this because he loved them and he wanted them to know what he desired. He didn't just teach with words, he taught with his actions. So Shelby, Jesus gave this example of serving one another, because he wanted his apostles and his disciples, boys and girls, you are all his disciples. He wanted them, he wants you to serve him. So whenever you're serving anybody, you are serving like Jesus wanted you to. Service is love. So Hadley, Jesus, when he washed the feet, he shocked all of his friends, but he did the service of a servant because he did it from me. So Bo, when you get your foot washed here, you can remember that Jesus did this for the closest of his friends because he loves them. Jesus will always love you, all of you. He wants you to serve too. He washes the feet to give us our first example. Anna, Jesus wants you always to be his disciple. He wants you to know the way to follow him is to love him and do him. Jesus really wants us to be his followers. And he did not just this to surprise all of his disciples that day. He did more, and I'll show you in a minute. So boys and girls, could you please put your shoes back on? Thank you for sitting so quietly. Now I'd like you to leave your towels under the chair. You could do that once your shoes are on. And then I'd like you to take a place at the table. Karen's, my helper is going to take the towels and then you're welcome to fill it. They were already shocked, totally shocked by what Jesus had done. There's one over here, and then one over here. That's fine. Just be careful there by the. Be careful, Hudson. Thank you. Okay. So Jesus already shocked by washing their feet. That is not the job of an important rabbi. But then they knew all the words to the Passover meal. They knew all the things they were supposed to do to make this the beautiful representation that God had asked for. And Jesus once again went off script and gave them some new words, some miraculous words that changed history forever, boys and girls. Jesus sat them at the table. And these powerful words that changed the world forever are still being said all over the world at all times. In fact, somebody in the world somewhere is saying these words right now. But this is the first time these words were heard. And this is, I'm going to tell you what day this was. This was a Thursday. It was the Thursday before Jesus died on the cross on Friday that he had this Passover meal with them. And he said to his friends that he wouldn't be there with him much longer, but they didn't understand. Just like they didn't understand why he needed to wash their feet. And then Jesus took the bread and he blessed it. And he broke it. And he gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take, eat, this is my body." Jesus said, "Take and eat. This is my body." Now this isn't, boys and girls, this is just bread. But we are remembering what Jesus did at that Passover. We're remembering what he did and how he did it. Now this bread, boys and girls, is simple bread and will always remain bread. But at your first communion, boys and girls, that bread will be the body and blood of Jesus. It'll still taste like bread. It'll still taste like wine. But it will be the body and blood of Jesus. Now, can you imagine what his friends were thinking? This is his body? What does he mean? That's the first time they heard those words. And he said, "Do this in remembrance of me." He told his apostles that they must do this. So that's what Jesus needed to do. He needed to change the Passover because Jesus said that he was going to bring the new covenant. Now, God had a covenant with his people before that, but Jesus is making the new covenant. And the bread of life, the Eucharist, as you'll receive in communion, is part of that new covenant that God made with us. And Jesus told us in the Bible, he says, "I'm going to be with you till the end of the age." But then we also know that Jesus, even after he rose from the dead and he walked 40 days around the earth, he ascended into heaven. So if he ascended into heaven, how did God stay with us till the end of the ages? In the Eucharist, perhaps? Here he is. For you to meet, to receive. He wants to be so close to you that you even eat his body. Now, boys and girls, when you receive communion, it's still going to taste like Jesus. It's still going to taste like bread. It's still going to taste like wine. It's going to look like bread. It's going to look like wine. But it really is transubstantiated. That means turned into the body and blood of Jesus. And it never changes back. Now, Father will consume all the wine at the Mass, but the bread, like Father said, goes into the ciborium and into the tabernacle because it always remains Jesus. And that's why when we go into church, we genuflect to remember it truly is body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus. So the next words that we heard from Jesus, he took the cup and he said, "This, my friends, is the blood of the covenant which will be poured out for many. And then Jesus went around to the table, and each person drank from his cup. We're going to do it this way, so please take a cup. He did, again, offer thanks to God for the fruit of the vine. He did change it with his words that were miraculous. This is my blood. You have grape juice. You guys have grape juice. If you don't want to drink it, that's fine. But the grape juice is to remind us what Jesus did on that first Thursday, which we call, you know what we call, have you ever seen that picture where all the disciples are sitting on one side and Jesus is there? There's a lot of famous artwork like that. We call it the Last Supper. But his friends that were at the table that night, they wouldn't know to call it the Last Supper. They thought they were going to have dinner the next night with Jesus, and the next night, and the next night. That's what they had been doing for years. For the 3 years they hung out together. But Jesus knew he was going to die on Friday. He knew he was going to rise again on Sunday. Did Jesus stay dead, boys and girls? No. He rose from the dead. Now, they had to bury his body very quickly when they buried him because it was almost Sabbath. And there was laws that said you couldn't touch the body of Jesus during the Sabbath. So the women, early on Sunday morning when the Sabbath was over, when the sun had come up, they went there to anoint his body. Because remember, he was the most important rabbi. And they wanted to treat him like he was as important as he was. And they loved him. They wanted to anoint him because anointing a body was a way of reverence or being kind to the body of Jesus. So that's what they did. The women went to the tomb. Does anybody know what happened when they got to the tomb? He wasn't there. Yes, he wasn't there. The body was gone. And at first, one of the women thought somebody had taken him. And she was crying. She was crying that the body of the Lord had been stolen. But it hadn't been, had it? Jesus was already risen, and he was going to Galilee to meet up with his friends. And before he did that, he appeared to one of the women, but she didn't recognize him. Do you know why she didn't recognize him?
It's because he thought he was dead.
Well, she thought he was dead, so he probably wasn't even looking for him, was she? That's a real good point. But also because he had his risen body. Okay, so Jesus probably looked a little different. We don't know. But for whatever reason, she didn't recognize him until she called him. He called her by name. He called her by name, and then she recognized him. He said to her, Mary. And then she said, Rabboni, which is a Hebrew name for teacher. So she recognized him and he called you by name. And that's why when I washed your feet, I tried to call you each by name, because that's how Jesus wants to call you by name to be his disciples. Boys and girls, will you be his disciples? You are his disciples. When you receive First Communion, you are his disciples. You are his disciples right now. But he wants to come so close to you that you're going to consume him. And so, boys and girls, we called this the Last Supper because we knew that was the Last Supper that the apostles had with Jesus. But you know what else we call this that happened that night? We call it the first Mass. It was the first Mass, boys and girls, because Jesus taught us, take and eat, this is my body. Take and drink, this is the blood of the covenant. And then he asked his friends to help him with it. So that's what happened when they went to Jerusalem on that Thursday. On Friday he died. On Saturday his friends were probably feeling, how do you think his friends were feeling, boys and girls?
Sad.
Sad, yeah. What were you gonna say, Hudson? How do you think they were feeling?
Disappointed.
Disappointed. And I didn't tell you the part about the people who took them away on Thursday night. So what happened, Thursday night, after they got done at this dinner, he got his friends together, all but one of the 12 that were following him. So 11 of them went with him to the Garden of Olives, or another name is the Garden of Gethsemane. And they went to pray. And Jesus was really praying hard, and he was feeling scared, and he was probably feeling a lot of emotions, because he knew what was gonna happen to him. But his friends didn't get it yet, and they fell asleep in the garden even. But they were awakened at one time to the soldiers showing up to take Jesus away. And when Jesus was taken away, I'm sure they were pretty scared, don't you think? That they were gonna get taken away too. So they probably even wanted to hide a little bit after that. But they remembered the words of this special Passover where Jesus was given these special words. This is my body, this is my blood. And those are the words that the apostles started saying, and those are the words that the priests said as well when they called down the Holy Spirit upon the wine and the bread. So boys and girls, it's time for us to move on, and let me tell you where we go.
The stress of Christmas. Yeah.
Is everybody?
Yep, should be.
All right, perfect. Good morning.
Morning.
My name is Corey Burgraff. We've been a parishioners here for about 2 years. We moved here from Texas, so actually originally from Minnesota, but my wife and I have been parishioners here at St. Lawrence, like I said, for about 2 years. Great parish, absolutely love it here. Two very, very good priests. The staff is wonderful. Great parish to be a part of. And the reason I'm here this morning, I'm just going to take a few minutes to tell you how I got here, not just to St. Lawrence, but how my wife and I and our family, how we became Catholic. We were not raised that way. We joined the Catholic Church about 9 years ago now. And so I was asked to just kind of sort of share how that little story happened. So before we start, just forgive me. I sometimes have to try my best not to go into what I call nerd mode, because I really like talking about this stuff. So if I go on a rabbit trail, just throw something at me. But I got this down to about 2.5 hours, so trying to it's like 30 minutes. So yeah, so I was actually raised, my wife and I are both from Minnesota. I'm from Owatonna, which is about 45 minutes from here. Some of you don't know that. And I was raised very, very strict Baptist, actually. I was a typical Baptist where we went to church every Sunday morning, went to church every Sunday night, went to church every Wednesday night. I went to school for 10 years in the church school at the church that we were attached to. So we were there all the time. And at the time, there was also a Baptist college in Owatonna that my dad worked at. So being Baptist was a very big part of our lives. I used to joke around that if the pastor was changing the tires on the church van, we were probably sitting there watching him. We were always at church. And it was nice because, it was just such a part of my life that being in church, and it was just such a central thing. But one of the drawbacks to that is that I also kind of grew up in a very anti-Catholic home. So a lot of the complaints that you hear people say about the Catholic Church, they worship Mary, they worship the Pope, they're not real Christians, all this and that. I've heard all of that. And part of the reason why is my ancestors, actually all of my relatives on my mom's side of the family are all Catholic, very devout Catholic. Almost all the relatives on my dad's side are very devout Catholic, except for one random branch that left the Catholic Church about years and years ago and decided to be Baptist, and that happened to be the branch that I came from. So growing up, and it kind of made me upset when I was a kid because I didn't really know much about it. I just kind of took all that, that Catholics aren't real Christians and all this and that. And it made me really sad because my grandparents were very faithful, very devout Catholics. And whenever they would come to visit, we would always get, ready for church on Sunday morning, and we would drive to the Baptist church, and they would walk across the parking lot. So I grew up right next to a Catholic church there. And they would always go to Mass every Sunday morning. They never went to church with us, they always went to Mass. And, all my cousins would go to Mass, Catholic Mass, whenever we'd go visit them. And it always made me really sad because growing up, I always thought, they're not going to, I was told, they're not going to go to heaven because Catholics aren't Christians. And so this was kind of the framework that I had my entire life growing up. And, just kind of kept that, my whole life. And then as I got older, went through high school, had no idea what I wanted to do when I grew up, which you'll find through this story is kind of a theme in my adult life. I never really could figure out what I want to be when I grow up. So I joined the military, and I joined the Navy. I was in the Navy for 3 years and was stationed in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. So I went from the cornfields of Owatonna, Minnesota to the beaches of Waikiki. It was a little bit of a culture shock, but one of the cool things about being stationed out in Hawaii is I had an aunt who lived out there at the time, and she, up to that point in my life, she lived there my entire life. So I knew who she was, but we didn't really know her all that well. So my mom told me, she said, well, you're going to be living in Hawaii, you're going to be, she doesn't have a lot of family out there, so you're going to have to get to know her and spend some time with her. Which I did, and it turned out to be a really good experience. We got to know each other really well, got to spend a lot of time with her, and she lived in this apartment, really tall apartment in Honolulu, and if you looked out on her balcony, there are all these tall buildings, and right across the street, in the middle of all these tall buildings, this little one-story Catholic church, St. Peter and Paul's Catholic Church, and that was her parish, and she was just like my grandparents. Every Saturday night, she would go to Mass. I would go and spend the weekends with her just to get off base and just get away from the military for a little bit, and every time that I would go to visit her, at, she said, well, I'm going to Mass, you want to come with? I was like, well, I'm Baptist, I can't go with because, probably wouldn't make it through the door if something terrible would happen to me. So I never went to Mass with her, but every weekend that I would spend time with her, she always made time to go to Mass. So, so spent my 3 years out there and saw that, and, my time was done. Again, still had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. So I got out of the military and moved back to Owatonna. And at the time, it was really neat because my dad worked at this college, like I said, and most of the students went to the same Baptist church that I went to. So I thought this was great. So I was 21 years old. I had just gotten out of the military. This was right after 9/11, so everybody held military veterans in really high standards. So I thought, well, this is going to be great. I'm going back here. These college girls are going to love me. And I was wrong. It did not happen, except for one exception. I did get one of them to go out with me. It's kind of a long story, but I got kind of strong-armed into asking her out on a date, and then she felt bad for me and just said yes. And that was, 23 years ago? So, and that's my wife, Lindsay. So, I think she likes me. It's been about 20-some years that we've been together. Been married for 20 years now. So, when we got married, Lindsay was raised very similar. She's actually from Rosemount, not far from here, but was raised very similar to how I was. She was raised Baptist, the same type, going to church, 3-4 times a week. Not quite as anti-Catholic, but still, Catholic church to her was always just kind of something that it's one of the churches that those other people go to. So one of the nice things, though, is like once we got married, because of the way that we were brought up, going to church and just being part of a church was just kind of part of our lives. There was never really a time where we had to question, whether we went to church. As soon as we were married, we just found a church and started attending. And so, we were just a young married couple. We were living in Faribault at the time. I was working as a paramedic and just starting a young family. Our oldest son was just born, and we were involved in a non-denominational church there. And had a lot of fun, it was a lot of great people there. We were involved the best that we could. I would play guitar in the praise band. She would sing on Sunday mornings, the praise band, small group Bible studies, things like that. Just really kind of doing the best we could to be involved and go to church, because that was just what you do. And in this quest to figure out what I should do for a living, or what I should do when I grow up, I was still trying to figure this out. I wanted to go back in the military. And so I applied, got accepted to the Warrant Officer Flight Program in the Army. So I wound up, packed up the family, and we moved from Faribault to southern Alabama, another little bit of a culture shock. Moved to southern Alabama, and I joined the Army to be a helicopter pilot. So I started flight school, and the Army started teaching me how to fly helicopters, and we were just having fun, just living in Alabama, being back in the military. And the same thing, though, we got there, and we just found a church, just started going to church, because that's what you do. And at this time, we went to church on base. One of the chaplains, one of the military chaplains would preach on Sunday mornings, and it was a good experience. We were doing what we knew we had to, but it was really hard to, I don't know, at this point it kind of felt like we were just sort of checking the block. But we were, going through that, still going faithfully, because that's just how we were raised. And I got in a conversation with a friend of mine that I was in flight school with, and we started talking about the Bible. And we started talking about Bible studies and learning things about the Bible. And he went to a church called the Churches of Christ. I don't know if you've ever heard of them. It's a very conservative Protestant denomination. And they take the New Testament they interpret it very literally, and they try to follow it the best they can. They take pride in what they consider, just pure Christianity or New Testament Christianity or first century Christianity, and which, it's debatable how it is, but it really appealed to me at the time because I thought, well, there's all these confusions, there's all these churches out there, and there's all these things that, some people teach this, some people teach this. So I thought if you can just go right back to the basics and just go right back to where all this stuff started, that's got to be the answer. So we started going to church there, started attending a Church of Christ in Dothan, Alabama. It was actually a great church. To this day, we still have friends there. We still keep in contact with some of them. But one of the things that I started doing at the time, and this was kind of the first way that God started pushing me towards a Catholic church, is I became what I call very spiritually arrogant. And is what I would do is I was so proud of what I was learning, and I was so happy with what I was learning, and I just knew beyond the shadow of a doubt that I was right. This was the correct church, and we were doing everything correct. That is what I would do is I would start studying other people's churches, and this is where I go into nerd mode, and I would just start reading everything all these other churches had, and I just loved picking out where everybody else was wrong. So I would look up what the Methodists were teaching, I knew they were wrong, the Lutherans, they were wrong. I used to get into discussions with my mom about how she raised me Baptist. I was like, well, you realize Baptists are wrong because of this, and you taught me wrong, and really got kind of arrogant. And like the Catholics, I didn't even bother reading about the Catholics because they were so far off base me at the time, they weren't even, really even considered a church in my mind, which was really sad. But that kind of started nudging me to start looking at what other people believe and started, pushing me in that direction. So I finished flight school in the Army, and I was, at the time, I was waiting for my orders to go to our next place we were getting stationed, and I wanted to stay somewhere warm because, spent most of my life in Minnesota. The only other place I lived was Hawaii. Southern Alabama was great, so Lindsay and I were like, oh man, hopefully we get somewhere warm. Hopefully the Army just keeps us in, somewhere warm. And at the time, a lot of people were getting orders to Fort Drum, New York.